Thermal bridging is anywhere within the building envelope where you've got a break in the insulation. This can occur where your ground floor meets your wall, and also if you're installing a window where you have a lintel, sill and a jamb. Each one of those is a thermal bridge, and they're a great example of where you have an area of a lot of heat loss from a thermal bridge. They measure it in what's called a psi value, and a psi value is how much heat do you lose from a metre of thermal bridging junction. This is all really important in the SAP calculation because it have a very, very big impact on what your final carbon emissions are going to be. So how does this affect SAP? Well, under Part L 2006, this was very straightforward. It was very easy for us and it was very easy for developers. We had 4 options that we could enter into the SAP calculation, and each option summarised the total heat loss from all the thermal bridges in the building. The first option was to enter a figure of 0.15. This was a worst case default figure, very high heat loss from your thermal bridges. The next option that we could enter was a figure of 0.08, and this figure we could use if you told us you were building in accordance with what's called accredited construction details. We then had another option, which was a figure of 0.04, obviously much lower, and that was what we could input if you were building in line with enhanced construction details. And then finally we could enter in a bespoke figure that could be calculated by a qualified professional that would suit the heat loss of that particular building. The difference between the best and worst of these figures can be up to 15% on a SAP, so clearly it's a really big impact. Now, under Part L 2010, we can no longer enter in these whole house default figures. We have to measure the length of every single junction in a property and then give that junction an appropriate psi value, so the heat loss for that particular junction. Now that figure can still be a worst case default figure, or it can be an accredited detail, or it can be an enhanced detail. You also have the opportunity, if you so wished, to have the psi value for any particular junction manually calculated, and we find that in some instances this can give you a better result. It's really important to make sure you're using accredited construction details or better to ensure that we're not using the worst case default value. Now, the next best thing to do is identify any areas of the building, any thermal bridges that have got a lot of heat loss. So for example, the default psi value for a lintel is very, very high. If you chose to use independent lintels, which reduce the heat loss, you can cut that psi value dramatically. We are now finding that many manufacturers are able to provide a developer with a psi value for any particular detail. This is really good news for developers because it can prove to be a very cost-effective way of helping you comply with the SAP calculation.